Well, good evening, and welcome to this first audit meeting. And obviously, we're all relatively new, and so you'll have to forgive me if I don't know your names or I stumble over them, or even call you somebody else. So it will be my apologies. Right, it is now live, so I'd like to begin. So start with item 1, which is apologies.
Thank you. We just have the one apology from Councillor Bell.
Thank you. And Councillor Jill Haynes, whose husband's had a mishap, and so she's at A&E with him. So sadly, she can't be with us. Move to item 2 then, which is the minutes, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of April, 2024. Okay, are you all satisfied, happy with the accuracy? Thank you. So moving on to 3 declarations of interest to disclose any pecuniary, other registrable or non-registrable interest as set out in the adopted Code of Conduct. Nothing? Okay, thank you. Now we'll move to item 4, which is public participation. None? None? See, we are popular, at least, at the beginning. Hopefully that will improve. And so we move to item 5, which is the minutes of the Audit and Governance Subcommittee, to note the minutes. If any meetings have been held, which I don't believe they have. No? Nope. 6. Right, to get into the real meeting. So update on the 21-22 and 22-23 accounts external audit. Will that be you, Aidan, or?
Good evening, Chair. It will be from Ian House from Deloitte, but he's struggling to hear us at the moment. So, can you hear us now, Ian? Excellent. So we're sorted there. So I'll hand back to you, Chair.
So, Ian, you are online. It's over to you.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you, Chairman. So an update in terms of the Deloitte audit work. 21-22 audit is largely well progressed. We are working towards an end of September sign-off for the 21-22 accounts. For those of you not aware, earlier this year, DLUC consulted on arrangements to address the significant backlog in local government audit work. So that's why we're talking about 21-22 audits and 22-23 when those periods are some time past now. There's a significant backlog across the country with hundreds of audits unsigned at this point in time. So DLUC consulted on proposals which included a backstop for the 30th of September. So we were working towards completing your 21-22 accounts by the end of September and issuing a disclaimer opinion on your 22-23 accounts, which basically means we haven't been able to complete the work, so that Jackson and his team from Grant Thornton were able to continue with 23-24, albeit there would need to be some work done around the opening balances for 23-24. However, the election was called before DLUC were able to actually state what their policy position was in relation to the consultation they'd issued and the responses they'd received, and therefore no legislation made its way through Parliament. Both the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales and the Financial Reporting Council are now working with the new government to consider where they will go with the consultation responses and what their approach will be. In the meantime, all audit firms have been asked to continue as they were prior to the election being called, which means we're still at the moment working on a principle of a backstop opinion being given by the end of September. And that is really where we are at. It is not for us to really speculate, I guess, in terms of whether that September deadline is possible given the limited parliamentary time. but you can make your own judgments, I guess, in terms of what the priorities for a new government might be compared to local government audit. Happy to take any questions members might have in relation to that.
Sorry about that slight technical issue. Simon Roach, Co-operative member of the committee. Thank you very much, Ian, for that update. I wanted to ask a question about the control deficiencies that you had previously identified. So we had a meeting on the 25th of March, and I asked what progress had been made on those control deficiencies. We then had another meeting on the 15th of April, which referencing the meeting on the 25th of March. I asked again about the control deficiencies in terms of what progress had been made by management to address or resolve those control deficiencies. And they covered a variety of different areas: property valuations, debtors, income and expenditure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and I was under the expectation that the conclusions from that would be presented at this meeting. I was given the impression that that would be the case. So I guess my specific question is, you know, has that work on control deficiencies been affected by what you've just said? And if so, can you please give us an idea as to when we will see the conclusion of that control deficiencies, the control deficiencies recommendations that you've made, in terms of have those control deficiencies actually been resolved yet? Please, thank you.
Thank you, Simon. If I can ask Ian to respond.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so as part of the audit, we do cover off progress made in relation to control deficiencies identified in the prior year, and therefore they are wrapped up in that conclusion of that work. When we report on the audit in September, when we conclude the audit, we will include in our ISA 260 report, the report on the conclusion of the audit, what progress has been made or not, as the case may be, in relation to those control deficiencies. But it's part of the, it pulls together as we do the audit and as we move through the year.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I could ask make a general request. So as I mentioned, in a couple of the prior meetings, we discussed this. And I note that we don't have a sort of action register or action log or anything like that to make sure that questions like that don't get lost in time. And I wonder if I could request, could we have such a vehicle to make sure we capture key actions that come out of the meeting, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Do we have such a log? Obviously, I'm new to this, and I'd be interested to know that the questions that do arise are sufficiently chased up or moved forward into the next or following meetings.
Thank you, Chair. If I could respond to that. So I'm Aidan Dunn. I'm the Chief Finance Officer. So in terms of tracking, first of all, audit actions, we've got a very well-developed system for internal audit recommendations, an audit tracker that we've all got access to. External audit recommendations are sort of systematically drawn through the reports, as Ian's just outlined. But I think the point made around specific questions and challenges in this meeting, that's potentially a gap. So I think that's something that we can bring together, those three aspects of the internal audit challenge, external audit challenge, and then the audit committee challenge, I think would be helpful in tightening our governance.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment on that? I guess it's an exceedingly good idea, because if you don't do that, effectively external audit can choose what they bring back and effectively ignore your question. Not saying they would, but I'm just saying it could happen. Happy with that, Simon? Thank you. So this, thank you very much, Ian. So this report is to note the current position. And so we'll move to item 7, if you're all happy, which is the Dorset Council Audit Plan, year ending 31st of March 2024. And it says here, Jackson Murray, Sam Harding to introduce the report.
Thanks very much, Chair. So it's myself this evening. Unfortunately, we both had a diary clash for this new date. So I appreciate the flexibility in allowing me to dial in this evening. So this is the first of 3 reports that we've got on this evening's agenda, and they're all related to our audits of both the Council and the Pension Fund for the 23-24 financial year, and that follows our appointment as the Council and Pension Fund's external auditor by PSAA. Some of you may be aware of Grant Thornton, so we've provided some audit-related services to the Council in the form of housing benefit assurance, process work, in accordance with the DWP's instructions over the last few years. And for those who aren't aware, so under the current and under the previous local government audit contracts, we were the largest external auditor to local government, and we remain fully committed to providing that external audit service in the public sector. So I'll give a quick caveat on this item rather than doing it on each individual one. As you've just heard, across the country, there's a large number of external audits still underway. Ian and his team continue their work on some of the council's prior period audits. So each of our reports this evening come with that caveat that we may need to consider any findings identified by Deloitte in the completion of any of their audit work, and also following any decision and confirmation of, as appropriate, of backstop arrangements that Ian has also just described, we may need to make any further adjustments to our plans as necessary. Clearly, should that be required, we'd alert you at the earliest opportunity. In terms of the first document, so the audit plan for the council's audit for the year end 31st of March 24, I'm just going to pick out the key items and key information from this, and then I'll invite any comments or questions. So for our financial statement audit responsibilities, we identify what's known as significant risks under the auditing standards. In our audit plan, we have 3 such significant risks identified. We have management override of controls. This is a presumed risk at any entity under our auditing standards. It's not a risk that we can rebut. So we identify that everywhere. And we also identify the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of the defined benefit pension liability, probably the 2 largest numbers in the council's accounts, and the 2 largest numbers in terms of estimation uncertainty. Those items are not dissimilar to what Ian and colleagues from Deloitte have identified in previous years as well, so hopefully they don't come as a surprise to committee members. In terms of our audit, we don't audit to the pound and the penny, we audit to the concept of materiality. At planning, we've determined materiality to be 12.6 million for the council, which is around 1.4% of prior year gross operating cost, and clearly trivial. So this is the level above which any errors or uncertainties would be formally reported to yourselves through the ISA 260 report that Ian just described in that previous agenda item. That level is 630,000. That's not to say we wouldn't pursue or discuss any errors, uncertainties below that level, but formally we don't need to communicate those through our ISA 260 report. In terms of our other responsibilities relating to value for money, we've got a separate report, agenda item 9, so I won't go into this area in too much detail on this report, other than to say at the planning stage, when we produced this plan, the dedicated schools grant, and specifically the high needs block deficit, was the one risk of significant weakness that we identified, and that's the terminology that's set out in the National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice, which sets the blueprint effectively for what external auditors are required to do in respect of value for money arrangements. In terms of the logistics of the audit, so our planning and interim work was mainly carried out in March, which led to the production of this plan. At the time we wrote this, our final visit was planned to take place from July to September. Colleagues are beginning the audit now. We received draft financial statements for the council last week, which is enabling us to begin our detailed work. As we say there, we hope to finish by September 24. However, we are cognizant of a few things, such as Ian and colleagues also undertaking audit work, as has just been described, to a very similar timetable, and also the question mark around will there or will there not be a backstop, and if there is, what is the date? So I would not be able to issue an audit opinion until the audit years up to and including 22-23 had been concluded, in whichever way that they end up being concluded. So we're aiming to complete the bulk of the work in September. Whether I'll be able to issue an opinion in September, again, it's not for us to speculate, but that may well be a challenge in terms of the latest developments. The proposed fee at our planning stage is just shy of 572,000. That's largely based on the PSAA scale fee, which is published on their website. There are one or two proposed variations to that scale fee in respect of items that were not included within the procurement exercise. There's further detail, the main one being developments in respect of ISA 315, which is an auditing standard. Any variations also need to be approved by PSAA before they become payable. The rest of the report then goes through in some more detail in terms of the actual work that we propose to do against each of the significant risk areas and the other prescribed responsibilities that I have under the Code of Audit Practice. We talk through briefly our IT audit strategy, and colleagues from our IT audit team have largely completed that work. They're in the finalisation stages, agreeing findings with management, and that then informs me and my team's audit strategy. Any control points that arise from that work will in due course also be reported to this committee once that work is finalised. I really wasn't going to say anything more on the report itself. There's lots of information in there around backstop and our responsibilities, but those areas are probably the key ones that I wanted to pull out. So at that point, Chair, I'll pause and invite any comments or questions.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your summary of the audit plan. I have a couple of questions, one for Grant Thornton and one probably for Aidan, I think. The question to Grant Thornton, and thank you for drawing our attention to the public sector audit appointments group that has negotiated on behalf of local government in terms of audit fees. I did have a look at that ahead of the meeting and see that they say they achieved only a 151% increase in fees, which I'm not sure if that's an achievement as such, but anyway. But as you mentioned, the cost of the audit for Dorset is significantly in advance of that 151%. And you talked about variations. I guess my question to you is, do Dorset Council get any additional assurance or additional value add from that significant increase in fees over and above what was done previously by Deloitte?
So through you, Chair, if that's okay if I respond. So ultimately, the responsibilities of external audit remain the same under the current Code of Audit Practice. So the outputs, I suppose, for the Council in black and white would be an audit opinion on the financial statements, and it would be an auditor's annual report, which includes our commentary on value for money arrangements. I suppose, given what Ian said in terms of that wider backlog, we are keen to ensure that you are receiving timely audit reports and timely audit findings. Hopefully the fact that you've already got your value for money report on this evening's agenda shows that we are here to get work done and up to date and to speed. Ultimately, that procurement exercise, as you said, was run by PSAA. I think the rise in fees reflects a large number of different variables that we could probably speak about all evening, but I'm not sure everyone in the room wants to necessarily get into that conversation just now. I think one of the things that comes down to it is there is a lack of supply in the market. People do not want to do this work. There is a risk associated with it. And ultimately, when the procurement exercise came around, audit firms decided whether they did or did not want to do the work. And if they did, what price was required to do so. And if my other comment on that would be, the scope of an audit has increased significantly compared to probably what was done prior to the last contract. So in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a significant focus on external audit quality, the regulatory pressure put onto audit firms via the FRC has invariably also increased work and therefore cost. But to answer your question, what are you going to get? You're going to get an audit opinion, and you're going to get a value for money report in the form of an auditor's annual report. The wider value add, I suppose, comes from our position in the sector and the fact that we do audit the majority of the sector, so we're able to provide some of those insights. But I have no doubt that Ian and colleagues would also do the same.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. I think it leaves me a little dissatisfied, but I guess I'm just going to have to be dissatisfied. I guess the other question then I have is for Aidan, that on page 32, I think it is, of the pack, it talks about a list of assumptions that are necessary to keep the cost at this, what I think is relatively expensive, £570,000. And I guess my question to you, Aidan, are there any concerns or risks associated with those assumptions, or do you think we're in really good shape on that?
Good. Thank you. Good question. So this is on page 32, list of assumptions that range from the assumption is that we, Dorset Council, will prepare a good set of accounts through to some of our systems and that availability of appropriate IT infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the biggest risk, as we've just touched on, is around the backstop. So this sense of what work will Deloitte be able to do for the 22-23 accounts, which will set the tone for 23-24 accounts. So that is a risk. Other than that, in terms of the accounts that we've published last week and shared with Grant Thornton, we feel they're a sort of decent set of accounts. Grant Thornton have done a lot of preliminary work already in terms of meeting officers and getting a sense of the organisation. So at this stage, I've got no concerns about assumptions for the current audit, that's for 23-24, but my eye is drawn to maintaining adequate business processes and IT controls, because over the course of the next few years, we will be replacing, we'll need to replace our major finance system as we end the contract on the current system. So that's going to be a really, really complex piece of work for us as an organisation to navigate through. Of course, we need to maintain tight financial controls throughout that whole experience, but there's an area of risk that we're looking at and looking to mitigate. So in terms of the current audit, I'm confident. The future, there are some areas that we need to mitigate that risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Aidan. I guess it won't be until we receive a report, but we know we've got value for money or not. So that will be something. If I could just come to, sorry, where are we? So, Roger, isn't it? It's Roger, yes. Can we come to Roger? Question?
Is that working all right? Okay, sorry. Roger Ong, co-opted member. Just to Grant Thornton, just really linking into what we just heard. As you said, there's been a potential lack of resources in a number of institutions or willingness to actually undertake work in this sector. We'd just like to have reassurance and your estimate of what the sort of FTE requirement you feel that Grant Thornton are going to be able to provide to ensure the audit is done in a timely fashion on that basis, please.
So through you, Chair, our team is already identified, and as I said, now we've got the accounts we're starting, so it's led by myself, and ultimately I have responsibility for issuing the audit opinion when it comes to that. Sam is the senior manager who will be supporting me, and she will be also supporting the team. Then we have a team of 4 other individuals allocated for this audit. As I said, we were aiming to get work completed by September. Whether that is possible or not, we will keep the committee updated, but that's our initial outline and plan for this audit. And then for the pension fund, which is a separate set of accounts but links through to the council's main set of accounts, there's a slightly different team, so I'm supported by another manager, Andrew, and then a wider pool of pension auditors. So we have about 12 to 15 auditors all working across all of our pension fund audits, of which we have 8. So we're again targeting a completion timetable of similar, so towards the end of September for completion of that particular audit. So I'm satisfied ultimately that I have got sufficient and suitably qualified resource to be able to do this audit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that answer. If I could just ask you one question about materiality. You may say that the two aren't linked, but the £630,000 that you've chosen, the council itself has responsibility to bring anything over £500,000 in respect to expenditure to full council to be ratified. The difference, do you consider the two should be the same, or do you believe that this is your materiality level as opposed to the council's?
So I think probably the second part of your question there, yes. So this is our materiality level set by ourselves for the audit. The council may well have a different materiality level, for financial decisions through the scheme of delegation, as you've just described, but also in respect of other financial matters, including the financial statements. Generally, we derive triviality or audit triviality through a calculation based on materiality. So the higher your materiality level, the higher the triviality level then. And it's reflective of the overall value of spend going through the set of accounts, ultimately.
Thank you. I'm sure we're all very confident of that response. Okay, so anybody else have any particular questions on this item? No. We will move to item 8, which is again yourself, and it's the Dorset Pension Fund Audit Plan year ending 31st March 2024. Thank you.
Thanks, Jet. So I'm probably going to focus on a single page and talk through the key headlines for this one as well. So page 48 of the PDF pack for this evening. So in terms of those significant risks, once again, management override of controls. As I described, that's a presumed risk at all entities. Then we have the valuation of level 3 investments. So level 3 investments are essentially any investments that are hard to value. So there's no market for them. You can't actively trade them. And there aren't many similar assets that you could also use to derive a price. So these are the hardest elements of the pension fund's investments to value. So we identify those as a significant risk, again, because of the estimation and judgment involved in their valuation. The pension fund also directly holds a property portfolio. So similar to the council's accounts, the valuation of that portfolio is of significant interest to ourselves as external auditors as well. Now, slightly differently to the council accounts, we actually have 2 different materiality levels for the pension fund. There's 2 key statements. So there's the fund account, net asset statement. So planning materiality is 35 million for the pension fund itself, which we calculate as a proportion of expected gross assets at year end, whereas in the fund account, where you account for contributions, benefit paid, etc., we've got a lower materiality level on that particular account for £9.5 million. We talked through clearly trivial just now, and on the council accounts, clearly trivial for the pension fund is 1.75 million. As I said, previously in response to a question, our audit timetable is due to run concurrently alongside the council's audit. So we say July to September. We again received the pension fund accounts in the last week or so. And the proposed fee at the planning stage is just shy of £91,000. Again, there's further detail of the fee later on in the report. That's largely based on the PSAA scale fee. Again, I'm not going to go through the rest of the detail included with the audit plan. I'll take that as read, but happy to take any comments or questions on the pension fund audit plan.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? If not, I'll ask you to note the report, and we will move on to item 9, which is the interim auditor's annual report. And once again, it's back to you, sir.
Thank you. Sorry, you get sick of my voice now already. So, final one from me. You read out the title. It has interim in the title, as I can't issue this report in final until all prior year audit years are signed off, and I also need to issue this alongside the opinion for my financial statements audit as well. So we're bringing this to you as our interim findings, given that the arrangements we look at are those in place up to the 31st of March 2024. We don't expect those arrangements to change. However, I can't issue this as final for the reasons I've just described. So this report sets out the findings from our work, whereas the previous two reports were what we were proposing to do. Value for money work, currently under the current Code of Audit Practice, we're required to focus and comment on 3 key areas. So that's financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. And the report sets out a commentary on each of those areas, raising recommendations should they be appropriate. In terms of the levels of recommendations that I'm able to issue, they range from an improvement recommendation, which is the lowest level of recommendation, followed by a key recommendation if we feel there's been a significant weakness identified, and the significant weakness is the terminology set out in the NAO's code. And then I'm also able to make use of statutory powers, including statutory recommendations, public interest reports, etc. So that's the scale or the escalation, I suppose, in terms of findings and in terms of recommendations. Now, there's a lot of text and information in this report. So again, I'm not going to go through page by page. I'll take it as read. However, I just wanted to pull out the key findings, I suppose, from the work that we've issued to date. So the key finding really links through to the financial sustainability element of the 3 areas of focus that we're required to look at. So in item 7 on tonight's agenda, the Council's audit plan, I described a risk around DSG, dedicated school grants deficit. And following the work, we've raised and identified a key recommendation and a significant weakness in the Council's arrangements around the plan to address that DSG deficit, which through the financial year we're looking at, 23-24, was not on target to eliminate the cumulative deficit within that plan timetable that had been agreed with the DFE. Now, clearly there's some very large sums of money included in here, and for that reason, for one of those reasons, we've raised this as a key recommendation, which is set out on page 71 of tonight's pack, along with management's response to this on page 72. Now, I think it's important to state that this is not a Dorset Council specific issue, and that's reflected throughout this report as well. So there are a number of authorities around the country with some significant dedicated school grant deficits, and indeed within management's response to the recommendation on page 72 of the pack, they set out some further information and context in terms of the number of councils within the safety valve programme and other support and national programmes in respect of DSG. However, notwithstanding that, what we're required to look at is the arrangements in place, and in our view, given that the council had agreed a plan with DFE and that council performance is not against and in line with that plan, we have raised a significant weakness here. That mirrors reporting that you will see in Grant Thornton reports around the country in similar situations, and indeed we're required, or I'm required, to take that through a consistency panel to make sure that I'm treating Dorset Council equally to any other Grant Thornton audit around the country. So that was the key finding, or the one key recommendation that we've made. That's not linked to other financial sustainability necessarily, and you'll have seen in the news a large number of reports around Section 114 notices, public interest reports, statutory recommendations, etc. in respect of financial sustainability. So I think it's important to note that we aren't saying that here at Dorset Council. However, we are saying DSG is a problem, as it is for a number of authorities around the country. The rest of the report sets out some details in terms of why we feel and why we've concluded in the way that we have, along with some of the other improvement recommendations that we've made. So they are set out throughout the report, and also will then be followed up through subsequent reporting, which links to a question on a previous agenda item. So in each of our auditors' annual reports that we will issue each year, we will follow up each of those improvement recommendations with whether we believe those have been appropriately addressed or not by management, and whether they are closed or remain ongoing. Each of the improvement recommendations that we set out throughout the report have been agreed and discussed with management, and there's a management comment against each of those reports themselves. Each of the three areas do raise improvement recommendations, so we have improvement recommendations through each of the key strands. However, it's just the DSG element that raises that one key recommendation. Chair, I won't talk anymore because I feel I've taken quite a lot of committee's time this evening already with my voice, so I think it's probably easier if I pause there and invite comments or questions from members.
Well, thank you very much. And do we have comments and do we have questions? Aidan, you'd like to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I could just make a comment there, and Jackson has gone to great lengths to describe the DSG in the context of the national situation. I just really want to emphasise the point, particularly for new members whose this will be the first meeting and maybe the first time they've really sort of looked at this level of detail. And Jackson, can I just ask you to comment that, to be very clear, that this isn't a problem you've discovered in Dorset Council. This is the first thing that we as a council told you about when you joined as our external auditor. The high needs block is something that we as a council have been taking very seriously for a long time. And we've worked hard on the wording of the recommendation, because the recommendation says continue. And essentially, we are continuing. We're doing what we'd always planned to do. But we need to strike the balance between you as a new external auditor coming in and being very clear of the position. So I just wanted to emphasise that Dorset Council is doing everything it can to manage the high needs block deficit. And in the national context, I think this is going to be very, very high in a new minister's in tray at the moment. So Jackson, can I just, if I may, Chair, invite Jackson just to comment again. Have we been as open and transparent as you would expect for an organisation such as ourselves on this? Thank you.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, I wouldn't disagree with anything that you've just said there, Aidan. This isn't something, as you said, that we've identified. You were very clear that this was the case, and indeed have reported as such in the public domain as well. So this is not a new issue that has been identified as part of our value for money work. However, given the context and given the guidance that we operate in, it would be our view that this does represent a significant weakness in arrangements, albeit this is not just a Dorset Council issue. You've been very clear and transparent about it. However, this does represent a risk to financial sustainability, not just for Dorset Council, but for the local government sector, in all honesty. So the short answer to your question, Aidan, was yes, you were very open and transparent about this.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have a question at this moment? I mean, what I will say is that as the outgoing portfolio holder, and I'm sure Simon here will, thank you for coming this evening, Simon, always very helpful, I think. how much work has gone into this particular issue. And what Dorset Council has done, which I would say to Jackson a lot of councils haven't done, has been significantly proactive in trying to address this by investment in Coombe House School, Centre of Excellence, by coming up with a plan that over a period of time, as long as it is successful, will address this burning issue. And it is a significant issue, but as you will, anybody who's seen any of the reports that I've given, I think Andrew Parry's also given a number of reports about it when he was in post. We're well aware of it. We've been trying to address it. Obviously, we've handed the mantle on to others. But this council is doing more than most are within the UK. And if you look at the numbers, while they are significant and they would be damaging should they be brought on the balance sheet in 2026, if you look at some of our neighbours who may be facing £500 million, we, in fact, whilst identifying this as a significant risk, and we understand that, would say that in the context of this country, we are doing a significantly good job, which I hope will continue on. Thank you. Anybody else wish to make a comment? Simon, you're more than welcome.
Just to support you in that, Chair, I think that the figures can look a bit scary, but I think when you look at, as you say, look at some of our neighbours, but actually look at where we are and the agreement that we have with the DfE or are renegotiating with the DfE, it is manageable at this time. We await, of course, a new government and decisions they make, quite where, Finance Director, quite where it sits in their to-do list, I don't know. I suspect maybe not as high as we would like, but it's still a very significant issue that has to be resolved over the next couple of years.
Thank you for those comments. I would also add that, of course, central government has not a clue what to do about it because they have pushed this down the road on numerous occasions. And when we first, this council was formed, it would have already been reported had they stayed with their original plans. But of course, it's been pushed back, and no doubt it will be pushed back again by the new government. So if I can move on, the report is to note. I'd like to thank Jackson for lengthy reports. I think the significant thing to comment about all of the items, 6, 7, 8, 9, is that 21, 22 and 22, 23 audit completion is absolutely essential for this committee, and that I understand that you are probably in a difficult place, of course, until with the possibility of September and a sign-off. But until that happens, each year is very difficult to complete because we don't have any opening balances. And as accountants know, opening balances are slightly important. So that's where we are. But I can assure you we won't be dropping this. We'll be coming back to this with a vengeance. And if something isn't done towards the end of the year, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about it. Thank you. So we'll move to item 10, which Aidan is yourself. It's the draft out-term report for 23-24. Thank you.
Actually, Chair, I'll introduce this report and then hand over to Aidan if you're happy with that. This report has already been through Cabinet. I'd again just like to repeat my thanks there to staff, to our officer cohort, to our senior managers and leaders, and to previous administration. It's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this report, and I think everyone can see it. We've got a new government. We have the same old issues. We're looking back a year in this report. It does throw forward in quite a number of areas, but the same questions will be coming, the same banging of the drum that I know you and your colleagues have been carrying out there at Chair, so funding, the schools grant, dedicated schools grant we've just been talking about. We've had announcements today about housing. How's that going to work and what are the implications and consequences for us? We have demand-led services, adults and children. I said at Cabinet did a fantastic job at keeping within or roughly within their budgets. That's going to be ever more difficult, but we give them every encouragement we can. Inflation is still there. It might have come down to levels that we're more used to seeing, but it's still there and still has consequences. And there are lots of underlying pressures. We do have within this report, as have been highlighted previously, some transformation challenge issues. The outturn then is the end of a year financial report. It's also the start of the challenges and outlines many of the challenges ahead for us now. But with that brief introduction, Chair, if you're happy, I'll hand over to Aidan.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So just in terms of context for those new to the committee, this report has been to Cabinet already, reporting about last financial year, but we bring it to the Audit Committee on a quarterly basis as an opportunity for committee members to really get under the skin and drill into some of the numbers if they wish. And of course, an opportunity as we go through the financial year, if there are hot topics, then we can invite the specialist officers responsible for the individual budget lines to come and give a clearer account of the pressures they're facing and the activity that's underway. But if I could just draw out 6 key points from this report to bring a bit of focus to the conversation. So overall, for last financial year, we are reporting an overspend of just under £1 million. So that represents about 0.3% of our budget. So that's an overspend of 0.3% of our budget. The report is about the fourth quarter of the financial year, and that highlights that previously at Q3, we were reporting a slightly worse position. So we did improve in the final quarter of the year. So we made an improvement of around £2.5 million. The area I think that we should be concerned about, and certainly we as a finance team and as a senior leadership team are concerned about, is that whilst the report looks reasonably positive that the budget was only the just under £1 million overspent, that's the bottom line. There was some significant service overspends during the course of the year, overspends and under recovery of income. And they have been offset by central opportunities, sort of releasing the contingency. We collected more from council tax and business rates than we'd anticipated when we set the budget, and we had some improvements on treasury management. So there were some areas of service overspend that were offset by underspends in central areas, and we can't guarantee that will happen every year. So I think that's a real reminder that we need to focus on our service budgets. Another point I'd draw out is around capital. So I've been talking about revenue so far. Capital, we reprofiled the capital budget during the course of the year. We had projected to spend £98 million at Q3. By the end of the financial year, we'd spent just under £80 million at the end of the financial year. So we've got a real signal there to focus on our capital spend for the year ahead. And then finally, as I talk about collection fund, business rates and council tax, I think we've mentioned a couple of times in various committees that we were able to benefit from one-off benefits from business rates in particular, which was useful, but we cannot rely on that on every year. So from my financial perspective, the bottom line result was very positive given the context, as Councillor Clifford has outlined, of one of inflation and rising demand. So a good outcome overall, but below the bottom line, there's areas that we are concerned about and will continue to focus on during the course of this financial year. So at that point, Chair, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Questions, Simon?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Aidan. I did have a couple of questions on a couple of line items, if I may. So one is about the send home to school transport, which, you indicate accounts for 6 million of the total overspend of 6.7 million on that line. Given what you've just said about the fact that you can't always guarantee there are going to be other opportunities for savings to offset those increasing service pressures, and that service pressure is driven both by price and volume, by the looks of it, or by the explanation, what can the team do to mitigate the risk that that's going to recur this year and we're just going to get another significant overspend in price and volume? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're looking at paragraph 10.55, which is on page 121 of the pack. It talks about the overspend last financial year. So 2 points really. So first of all, overspend last year of around about £6.7 million. So when setting the budget for this year, we, Cabinet have agreed to invest really substantially, put an extra £12 million in to the budget. So first of all, that means that we've made good last year's overspend and then put headroom of growth of about a further £5 million in. So 7 for last year, further 5 million. So we have set a budget for this year that we believe anticipates any, what we suspect would be the level of inflation and demand. So that's our first mitigation. I think the last year we do see as exceptional in terms of inflation, in particular around fuel prices. So we're hoping for a degree of stability on fuel prices, which is one of the real drivers of cost increases from a supplier's perspective. And then during the course of this year, we're going to be introducing new procurement approaches that brings a higher degree of competition, so we can have a more competitive price process. But the travel budget overall is part of one of our wider transformation programs, looking at how can we best get children to school effectively, at the most cost-effective way from us as well. So that ranges from the transport policy through to the procurement process, through to the routes, using technology to optimise the routes. So it's quite a comprehensive programme, but you're right to identify this as one of the most significant risks that we face as a council in terms of our revenue budgets.
Thank you very much, Aidan. And I have another question, which is on section 1312. Let me just find that myself, if I may. My apologies, but just bear with me 1 second. Yes, so 1312, yes, the gross without prejudice. So obviously I understand the argument made that in terms of the council not actively pursuing monies while Care Act assessment and financial assessments are being undertaken. And the summary says that there's about 2.7 million, which is over 365 days in debt. And I guess my question is, why does it take 365 days to do those assessments, if I'm interpreting that correctly?
Aidan, normally I'd answer this, but I think I'll let you.
A great question. So first of all, legally, we're not able to pursue the debt whilst the Care Act assessment is underway. Why it takes 365 days to do that assessment is a very good question. I think rather than hint at a response, I'd rather get a proper service response. So if I can ask my colleagues in the service, and we'll come back to you if that's okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. If I may just have one follow-up on that. Thank you very much. Which is that in another part of the paper, you talk about the recovery of debt and how that's improved more recently. But of course, what you can see from that is the recovery of debt that is a couple of years old. There's a very small percentage of that debt that is recovered. And so I guess my question just on this gross without prejudice number is if it's at least a year old, because of those restrictions on recovering that money, then do you then have an issue in terms of its actual recovery, because it's more difficult to recover debt that's obviously aged than is current? Thank you.
Do you want to say things like probate and that sort of thing? Time.
Sorry. Yes, so the whole world of adult care debt is a difficult one, ranging from some of the debt is raised and put against property, and then we can only when the property is sold are we able to sort of release or get the funding back. So it is quite a complex area, and how the gross without prejudice fits in with that, I can't answer at this point. So I'd rather come back with a proper answer from adult care colleagues, if I may.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the questions. Anybody else like to comment? Councillor Parry.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Turning to 10.58 of the report, page 122, SEND home to school transport and the overspend in that area. I know previously as a portfolio holder, part of that narrative for the overspend at that time was put down to a demand from families for individual travel arrangements, but not an individual travel plan. So the expectation was that the council would provide one-to-one home-to-school transport with a passenger assistant of medical qualification, even if the medical qualification wasn't something specified on an EHCP as part of the process. I know there was conversations that the team were going to try and work with families to address that and to give them the reassurance that they were seeking, that their child would be kept safe, but while still accepting the need for shared transport or an acceptance of an individual travel payment. Could I ask what sort of success you've had in achieving those aims?
Thank you very much. What do you say?
Okay, I can give you a number if you give me a moment in there. I think the principle, first of all, of working with the families is a crucial one. And what we've been able to do is employ a member of staff who has sort of specialist knowledge of children, of working with families in that context. And so it's about managing the family's kind of expectations and providing the right level of support, but also giving them the confidence that they'll be able to, they don't necessarily, or depending on the assessment, they don't necessarily need to travel on their own. So what we've been doing is some early work with families to help manage their expectations, provide that reassurance. And it's been about cost avoidance, future cost avoidance. So we're able to not necessarily start with an expensive travel package because we've worked with the family to reduce that. So overall, I think, I haven't got the number in front of me, but we're looking at cost avoidance this financial year of around about £500,000. So that's wrapped into the numbers. So by working with the families, avoiding costs while still getting the children to school in a safe and effective way is really this sort of preventative and supportive and working alongside the families is a crucial approach to try and manage the financial pressures.
Thank you. Did you want to, you got a frown on your face as if you may wish to make a comment.
I think my concern there is it would rather sound like we're delivering a two-tier service. Those who have an inherited service seem to be getting preferential treatment over those who are coming to us with a new EHCP. I have some concerns that there's a bit of disparity in terms of equality in how that is being funded at the moment. Perhaps that's something we could take away and have a further consideration of.
Aidan, are you happy to, do you want to make a comment now or do you want to come back to Councillor Parry at a later stage?
A quick comment, if I may. So the specialist is looking at existing transport packages as well, but we're finding, and it's a balance of where she puts her time. So we are looking at existing transport packages and, where appropriate, seeking to find a way of reducing those costs. But the primary bulk of the work is about sort of trying to manage expectations in the first place. It's where we get the most sort of financial benefit from the work. But I can assure you that we are looking at existing packages as well.
Thank you very much. No more questions. Brings that item to an end, which is again to note. And so we'll move to item 11, which is an update on the effective property services corporate landlord model. And Tim Hulme is going to present this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Can I first introduce Jess Maskery to you, my colleague? Following my appointment as corporate director in May of this year, Jess was appointed as head of service for assets and property. So you've got a benefit of two of us this evening. Colleagues will recall there was a question at the last meeting by the councillor in relation to the progress that we have made on corporate landlords. So we're grateful for the opportunity to come back and update colleagues on the work we have done thus far. Just for the purposes of clarity, and if you're not aware of the term, a traditional corporate landlord model is where the ownership and control of all assets is passed to the corporate centre. And it's got some certain connotations to that. And I think it's fair to say what we'll outline tonight is some of the challenges that we've had. Bit of context on progress. We have been on a bit of a journey. We've been in a period of transition. I'm the third corporate director in quite a short period of time. And I think what this evening's work will show you, and certainly the strategic asset management plan that's coming back to Cabinet in October, is marking a new chapter in how we view and manage the council estate and portfolio going forward. And I think it's important that we make that shift from being traditional property managers to placemakers. Just next one then, Jess, thank you. Bit of background, corporate landlord was effectively and originally adopted by Cabinet in 2020. There was limited progress and buy-in, and I think potentially perhaps due to the language and levels of engagement that were taking place at the time. And I think it's fair to say in the bit of feedback, some of the terminology was associated with control rather than support. I think over the period of the last 12 months, we have changed the dialogue. We've engaged with departments across the council, the significant engagement work with all directorates to foster a culture of collaboration. And last summer we launched the Effective Property Services, which is a shift from corporate landlord. And the dialogue now is much of the service as an enabling service, which is allowing frontline teams to focus on delivering their core and valued services whilst we take care of the premises and property related activity. I just think the last point before I hand over to Jess, I think this new approach has started to remove some of those artificial boundaries that existed and some tensions which were starting to form. And I think what you'll see today in the four areas that we focus on is a stronger working relationship between those areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. So as Tim mentioned, the new Effective Property Services approach is very much a collaborative approach. So we work with each individual service area to plan and implement an effective property services approach which best suits their needs as a service delivery function as well as the needs of the organisation as a whole. When we implement with a service area, we work with a multidisciplinary project group that oversees the implementation, and we bring in colleagues from across not only the service area, but also colleagues from across assets and regeneration, finance, climate and ecology, procurement, HR and so on. So it's very much an all-encompassing approach. And as Tim alluded to, it's an approach that will be a key pillar of the emerging strategic asset management plan. So we're starting to see some of the benefits from taking this more supportive and enabling approach to managing our property portfolio and supporting our service delivery colleagues. First of all, it's freeing up capacity within the service areas, those service delivery teams, to focus on delivering services to customers and to residents and allowing assets and regen colleagues to take up the more technical premises and property management tasks. We also anticipate that the approach will produce some revenue property savings through the standardisation of property contracts and the removal of duplication of work. The approach is allowing us to take a far more strategic approach to planning, the planning of our operational estate, including identifying opportunities for co-location across different service areas. And it's also resulting in improved building compliance and health and safety as we're moving property and premises technical tasks across to folk who have the expertise in those areas. So Tim mentioned we launched the new approach in summer of last year. And so far we've worked with a number of different parts of the organisation to move them into the new model. All 23 of the council-run libraries have transferred completely into the effective property services model, and they've taken what you might call the full package of support from us. We've also worked with Dorset History Centre to transition into the model. This was a really interesting piece of work to undertake with our colleagues in the Records and Archives service, because that building is quite a specialist building with all of the various collections housed within it. With Care Dorset, with whom we have an occupational agreement, we've revised that occupational agreement and established a service level agreement for the 22 properties that sit within that asset class. And whilst 16 of our offices were already corporately managed, we are reviewing those 16 to ensure that they're fully aligned with the new collaborative, supportive EPS approach. We're starting to work with teams across place services to put in place effective property services agreements with them. And we are working very hard with our colleagues in housing to roll out a effective property services model which works for them, establishing more robust joint working protocols and policies and procedures, including making some significant progress on a voids management process. In terms of the next steps, the first next step is to complete the phase 1 implementation, which we're making really good progress with. And then over the next 12 to 24 months, we will roll out the approach across the rest of the organisation. And that is the end of the slides.
Thank you, Jess. Chair, happy to take some questions.
Yes. So I believe you have a question, Spencer.
Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you very much, both of you, for your explanation and presentation. I'm used to corporate landlords because I work for a big multinational in London, and they use that very approach that you're using. One of the key things for me is floor space optimization. Now, no doubt it's buried away in there somewhere, but if it's really important that services only use the space they need to deliver the services that's required in accordance with our ethos as a council. Can you just reassure us that whilst you might be coming up with agreements per directorate, that you're actually working around ensuring they only use the space as absolutely necessary?
Thanks, Spencer. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of those conversations is understanding their requirements, but also looking for ways that can be those requirements can be met in a way that enables co-location. So to give you an example, with some of the work that we've done with libraries, we've found opportunities for family hubs to co-locate within those library facilities. Also doing a big piece of work on the office estate to ensure that we are making best use of the footprint that we have and then repurposing it as appropriate. So yeah, it's a key theme of the approach.
Spencer, can I just add as well, just should probably expand on the county hall work we've done. So we carried out a full room utilisation survey 1 week back in 2023, which showed some quite startling room occupancy and room utilisation rates. As a result of that, with Aidan, we've started conversations with the NHS and the ICB about co-location at County Hall. So that process and making sure that teams are only using the space they need is really, really important. We'll get to a charging mechanism one day and they'll start to give up the space, but not just yet.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone else like to? No? I'd like to, well, I suppose we should say welcome, Jess, and also I believe there's a significant amount of work has been done by Tim. I'd like to congratulate you on how you've moved forward. Thank you. So if everybody's happy, we will move on to item 12, which is the Councillor Code of Conduct and complaint process. And this is going to be introduced by Grace, I believe, yes? Jonathan.
Chairman, thank you. Before Grace introduces this next paper, I'm just going to say a few brief words because the breadth of your agenda, so up until now, you've been looking at the outturn, you've been looking at audit plans, different sort of business, but in this committee, you've got a wider responsibility even than that. I know that some councils have separate standards committees. We don't have that separate standards committee, and so if there are issues around councillor conduct, and in this case, councillor conduct in the complaints process, a report about enhanced DBS checks for councillors, and then changes that are being recommended for your constitution and how you do your business most effectively as a council, we bring those here as well, alongside everything else that you do. So we've just got a sort of suite of 3 papers here about conduct, behaviour, and about how you conduct your business most effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Grace Evans, I'm Head of Legal Services, and I've got the first report in that little pack for you. So I've got the report on Councillor Code of Conduct and the complaint process. As you'll have seen from your report, it's split into 2. The first section and the first 2 recommendations are about the current Councillor Code of Conduct. The Council adopted the current Code of Conduct on the 15th of April 21, and recommendations 1 and 2 of the report and paragraph 1.1 recommend one change to the Code of Conduct to include an additional item within other registrable interests. So you will all recall from your recent registering of your interests, there are a number of sections and a number of interests that you're required to register. And we're looking at adding an additional one in to include membership of other pressure groups, the Freemasons or other influential bodies of which you are a member. And the second of the recommendations is to invite Dorset Town and Parish Councils to consider adopting the same amendment. The remainder of the report is about arrangements for Councillor Code of Conduct complaints. Again, you have some current arrangements in place. The current arrangements were adopted by the Council on the 15th of April 2021. We've carried out a review of those arrangements and a new complaint process is proposed for you, and it's within your pack of papers. The new process builds on the structure of the current process that we have in place. It takes account of comments and feedback that we've had over the last 3 years, and that feedback has come from complainants and councillors complained of, from council staff who've been involved in managing complaints and investigating, from our independent persons who are involved in each of the complaints that we receive, and also from members of this committee's subcommittee, the hearing subcommittee, who've been providing comments and feedback as we've dealt with hearings. The new process is also in line with detailed LGA guidance, and it's really aimed at providing clarity and sufficient detail for all involved to be able to understand the arrangements and to ensure that both complainants and councillors are treated fairly. There are some key changes that I've set out in the body of the report. In paragraph 1.4, there are a list of groups of changes that are set out in the new process, and they include anything from clarifying at the outset the outcomes that can be achieved by submitting a complaint, through to the types of information that we may gather at an assessment stage, how we conduct the investigation, and importantly, how we take decisions about the outcome of an investigation and when or whether to refer it to a hearing. Key officers who've been involved in the past with complaint arrangements have seen and commented on the new arrangements that I'm proposing. That includes both the complaints team, investigators and democratic service officers. Jonathan has also consulted with the independent persons that we use for Code of Conduct complaints, and you might wish to hear from him in a minute with any feedback that he's received from them. And other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Jonathan, did you want to add something to that before? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. So we've mentioned independent persons this evening. The Council has 5 independent persons, and we consult them at various stages about complaints against councillors. And when we're talking about complaints against councillors, we mean complaints against members of this council and the 1,400 or so town and parish councillors who are also within scope and are covered by our current process and would be covered by the changes that Grace has brought forward this evening. So I've consulted the 5 independent persons about the suggested changes to the process. 3 of them have been able to respond, and the first has commented that these changes appear most helpful, and they will assist independent persons in establishing a better understanding and context about complaints. And one of the independent persons comments that they always try to build a picture of the situation by gathering as much relevant open source information as possible. And they thought this approach, the approach in this new procedure is extremely helpful, and that it's what you've got in front of you is a comprehensive and thoughtful review of the current procedure. So that's the first of 3 comments that I've got. The second independent person has commented, and if you can just bear with me. So again, supportive comments, and in particular, the second independent person agrees with the ability to make further inquiries before making a decision on whether or not a complaint should be referred to an investigator for a full investigation. Because sometimes in their experience, the independent people find that they just haven't got quite enough information at that initial stage to form a judgment and to give advice about whether a complaint should go for a full investigation. So that's helpful. And then the third independent person, based on some recent experience of a complaint that I think it's fair to say didn't go as well as it should, and we had a complaint where we ran out of time before the council elections in May, and someone who was a councillor is no longer a parish councillor, and we weren't therefore able to complete the whole of our process. So the independent person has given some feedback about that, and in particular, he was concerned that there should be an opportunity for an independent person to comment on the quality of an investigator's report before it's finalised. And we've already got built into the draft procedure that Grace has brought to you this evening that the monitoring officer and the independent person will review the report when it's at that draft stage and confirm if the investigation is of an acceptable standard. So that expressly addresses a concern that one of the independent people had based on their recent experience. So what we've got for you then is a picture of 3 of the 5 independent people have responded, have been able to respond, and they're welcoming of this approach and the changes that we're bringing to you this evening.
Thank you. People have got Spencer first, then Andrew, and then I'll come to you and to Richard at the back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think one of the things that I reflect on the first 5 years of this council is the importance of member ownership on anything and everything we do. You know, we are a member-led council, and to be a member-led council, you have to understand what you're being asked to consider. And I do appreciate the report that Grace has pulled together and the comments Jonathan's made. But for us as a committee to show that we are part of the scrutiny process, we're audit and governance, we've got 2 separate scrutiny committees, we're calling the, as we should do, the administration to account and oversee good governance in this council. And we've done that very well, and we've worked well. We've got Richard at the back, was the chairman of this committee for a while, for I think the whole time. And I think we established a really good principle of ensuring that with good member ownership. I don't think we've got that this evening. I think what needs to happen now is this committee, through the chairman, set up a task and finish group to look at this so we get a really clear understanding and we don't nod something through because I'm not saying it's wrong. I want to be convinced in my own mind of every aspect of this. There's a bucket of things here, albeit 3 key things, but it's a bit of a bucket. And I'd rather see us have the opportunity to scrutinise it in a little more detail. So when we come back with ownership of what's in front of us, or maybe something slightly different, so we can then, in full respect to full council, stand up and support that recommendation that comes to full council when that happens. I don't think I'm in a position this evening to support the report on the basis of what I see before me. I think we need a little bit more time as members to scrutinise the detail, Chairman. So I'd like to move a deferral, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Andrew.
Certainly be happy to support a deferral if that's the committee's wishes. I can see great merit in us doing that. I particularly am drawn to the comment under recommendation 1, part D, membership of other pressure groups, the Freemasons or influential bodies. I cannot recall any occasion when council has ever felt pressure from Dorset Freemasons, and I don't believe we've ever engaged with them at any point in time. It seems odd that they are somehow singled out as a group here in a document, when actually council, when I reflect on our first term, received far more pressure and influence from the likes of Extinction Rebellion, of which I note, of course, the table has had to be repaired at some cost after their antics. I think it's a bit of a discourtesy for them to be named in this document, the Freemasons to be named in this document. I would suggest that the minimum that is struck out, and an invitation to those who are engaged in Dorset Freemasonry, perhaps to make a presentation to the council on their work. But as for the rest of the document, I would agree. I think a deferral and a referral to a task and finish group would be more appropriate.
Thank you. Simon, I believe you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support a deferral. There was one thing that just jumped out at me in the complaints process, which seems to be a very thorough process, but it was and I understand the need for timeframes around things, but it was the time that a complaint has to be made, which is only 20 working days after the event, which seemed to me to be an extraordinarily short period of time. Now, I don't have a good reference, and I wondered if there were good references for that short period of time, but if there's going to be further scrutiny, I'm happy to defer that to further scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do other members of the wish to make comment? We've had Alex.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. Would you like me just to deliver them all together, Chair? Yeah. So I was just curious in relation to the document if you felt that the time spent on individual investigations was being used more efficiently, and was that being driven through in the document? In terms of the 1,000 and something councillors that we cover, just for my own knowledge, do we legally cover those, or okay? And I was just thinking about how we could maybe pass that work down rather than, just spending efficiencies. And I was interested as well whether you think, and it might be in the same vein as Councillor Flowers, I was curious of whether, because we're a new administration, I wasn't so, I didn't feel ownership of this and being able to vote on it. And I was just also wondered, because can it go further? And are there, I don't want to use the word better, that's a bit subjective, but are there more things that we can do to make this more efficient and make this process kind of tighter? Sorry, there's a lot there, Chair. It's the first time I've ever spoken in the chamber.
Well, thank you very much. We'll record that as a first then. But good questions. Do you wish to come back?
Chairman, I think it's helpful hearing those questions, because it illustrates that with a change in the membership of the committee, perhaps we've taken for granted a certain level of familiarity with the Code of Conduct arrangements. And it might be helpful in a task and finish group to be able to take you into some of that in more detail. For instance, the point about the 1,400 town and parish councillors, absolutely. Dorset Council is responsible for having in place arrangements under which people who wish to complain about the conduct of a town or parish councillor can come forward and do that. And it has to be to this council, not to the individual town or parish. So we have to put those arrangements in place. On the efficiency and effectiveness of them, one of the reasons we're bringing this forward, and it's the Local Government Association recommended procedure that we're bringing to you this evening, with some tweaks of our own to reflect local experience and understanding. The time periods, the time scales that we're trying to build into this are to address experience of, I suppose, deficiencies in the old arrangements where we weren't driving them forward quickly enough. And those with an especially long memory will remember, before councils were responsible for this work, we had something called the Standards Board for England that was famous for being particularly slow in dealing with complaints. And what is it that said, justice delayed is justice denied? So we've expressly tried to build timescales into this report to make sure that we are treating people fairly and that we're dealing with them efficiently and effectively. But Chair, I would be very happy for us to explain that in more detail. But we absolutely would like to get on and get a new procedure adopted, because the one that we've got isn't serving us particularly well at the moment. And the earlier we can do that in the life of this council and the lives of towns and parishes, the better. But we want to get it right for you.
Belinda, I believe you'd like to make a comment as well.
Thanks, yes. Belinda Borden, Lyme Regis and Charmouth. I've, for my sins, been involved in both sides of Code of Conduct complaints, and actually I'm quite happy with the suggestions of the process, and it sort of adds in an opportunity for a kind of informal resolution, which I think is a good idea. But I do share the concerns about 20 days, because I think at the moment, isn't it 28? That you have to make a complaint within 20, because, for example, you don't always have the opportunity to get the recording of a meeting that something took place in. That itself could take 20 days, or we don't get the minutes of town and parish council meetings until the next cycle, which is 8 weeks on. So, yeah, that would be my concern. But otherwise, I actually think the suggestions are actually really helpful for what it's worth.
Thank you very much. Richard, did I see you indicate you'd like to say something?
Yes, thank you. Richard Biggs, Dorchester Poundbury and Deputy Leader. Actually, I somewhat agree with Councillor Parry, actually. I did pick up on those extra potential bits being brought in. Maybe not the Masons, actually. I think there is an argument for having Masons. I think if there's an instance where the chair of the hearing happens to be a Mason and the person being complained against is a Mason, in public perception, there may be a view that they're not getting, fair. So I think that's something that perhaps ought to be there. But I just think in terms of other bodies within it, being a member, the list could be absolutely exhaustive. Being a member of the AA or RAC, they're a pressure group, subscribing to which, the list could go, I could probably reel off about 10 or 12. Have you got to list all of those? It's one thing being in a controlling influence, being on an executive or trustee or something like that, but being an ordinary member, national trusts, English heritage, where do you draw the line? And I think unless you gave a long list, that could cause all sorts of confusion. But I think the Freemasons one is, I think, something that has come up. I think it probably does need to be there, but I do accept that you probably want to have their view and some discussion around that. So, but yes, it does need some change, and I recognise the need for some speed in this.
Okay, well, we won't spend all evening on this particular subject because there seems to be a fairly consensus, I believe, that creating a task and finish group to look at this. I believe, as all new committees, when faced with making a recommendation on something that will hold fast for the next 5 years, we would like an input. And I don't think we didn't get that opportunity on this particular paper. So, would the committee agree with me that we will create a task and finish group? Is there anybody who doesn't agree with that particular action? In which case, we will create a task and finish group to look at this and bring it back as expediently as possible. Thank you very much, Grace. Thank you, Jonathan, for that. So we will move to item 13, which is the enhanced DBS checks for councillors. And Jonathan, I believe you're going to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I've commented in the report that as councillors, you occupy these positions of great trust in your communities, and you've also got responsibility for the oversight of a range of our people-based services. Those are services to children and services to vulnerable adults. And Simon Bailey, in his review of the Disclosure and Barring Service, his national review of that service, looked at the position around councillors, and he recommended that there should be changes to the law to make it a legal requirement that councillors in those positions of particular responsibility should undergo enhanced disclosure and barring service checks. So he asked for a change in the law. That change in the law hasn't happened yet. But he also recommended that pending such a change, councils should voluntarily put in place arrangements for enhanced DBS checking. And towards the end of the last Dorset Council, that is exactly what happened. And the Chief Executive and the Director of Children's Services, in particular with the support of group leaders, put in place those arrangements, and enhanced DBS checks were undertaken. And really pleased to say now that coming into the new council, all 82 councillors have signed up for those checks. We've only got 3 checks that we're waiting to receive back from the Disclosure and Barring Service. But there is a bit of a so what with this. What happens when a check comes back and it discloses something in a councillor's past? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with it most appropriately? Because we're also dealing with very sensitive information about an individual that's personal to them. And a key part of the policy that I'm recommending to you tonight is about our ability to be able to share with a councillor's political group leader that something might have been disclosed through a check, and we've not had that yet. So the checks that have come back so far have all been fine. But we need the ability to be able to talk to a group leader, because it might, for instance, be the case that it might be inappropriate for a councillor to be appointed by that political group to a particular role within the council. So there's a section of the proposed policy where we talk about the group leader being one of those authorised people who legally can receive the information that comes back through a DBS check. So it's about putting a policy framework in place that recognises just how seriously you as councillors treat the whole question of supporting vulnerable adults and the children for whom you're corporate parents. And I hope that as a committee you're able to support the paper, support the draft policy, and recommend that on to full council for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Does anybody have any comments? Alex, would like to make?
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan, just a quick question. What if the person in particular does not have a group leader? Maybe if they stand as an independent, or if they are from a political party that is just one of membership?
I think in that instance, and at the moment in the current format of the council, all 82 of you are politically grouped. But in that eventuality, I would first of all be talking to the individual with a view to bringing the chair of council into the space in place of a political group leader. What I have a mind to is something going wrong in the future, and then somebody asking me that question. Jonathan, you knew something about one of your councillors. What did you do to address that? And this framework helps to do that.
Thank you very much. Andrew, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. I think we're all familiar with the DBS check in its standard format. That's a legal record of criminal conviction. The challenge, of course, is behind an enhanced DBS check, because you're dealing with matters that may not involve or may not have substance to them, but allegations have been made, but it's not sufficiently proved, against somebody's good nature. And there is always a concern about that, because these things can be maliciously used. That said, what isn't entirely clear in this document or from Jonathan's explanation, if that information is passed to Jonathan, sorry, I'll depersonalise this, passed to the monitoring officer, and then shared with a group leader, and a group leader still chooses to make that appointment to a committee, as unpalatable as that may be, and I speak as a group leader when I say that, so it's unlikely to come from my direction, but it's possible in the fullness of things. Where does the liability and buck stop with that one? Is it a case of Jonathan should have overruled and made it public to council? Should it have stayed with the group leader, and the group leader will be hung out to dry should the worst happen in any scenario? And I just have a feeling that this is another one, and you've got to hate me for saying this, but it's another one I really feel I'd like to take to task and finish, and just get a bit more comprehension and understanding around where this goes as a policy, if that's not unreasonable, Chair.
It's not unreasonable, but all 82 councillors have signed up to it, so it's a tricky one. Jonathan, do you want to make comment on that?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. And it's so much easier, isn't it, when you're dealing with employees, because when you're dealing with employees rather than councillors, we're carrying out these checks as part of pre-employment, and we're able to find if you find something out about someone and you're unhappy with it, then we could say thank you very much. We won't be proceeding any further with this selection process. As elected people, you have a very different status, and the electorate speak, and we're carrying out checks after the event, and if someone is qualified to stand as a councillor and is not disqualified from public office, there is nothing that I can do about it. There's nothing that the chief executive can do about it. Nothing that a group leader, and nothing that collectively the other 81 councillors can do about that. So I don't think there's an easy answer about liability. What this is about making sure that we address any concern about an individual with the right people in the room, with the chief executive, with the relevant executive director, myself, and the group leader, so that if there are concerns about someone, then an informed decision can be made. Perhaps it's not appropriate for that person to serve in a particular capacity. But at the end of the day, officers, group leaders, you as fellow councillors cannot remove someone from office. And so the procedure that you've got in front of you is the best we can do to regulate a situation which is very different from that of an employee.
And if it's brought into legislation, that may change or not?
Again, if it's brought into legislation that there must be enhanced DBS checks, that's not the problem that we've got at the moment, because all councillors have volunteered to have them. It's what happens when you get a positive result on a DBS check and something that might call into question somebody's ability to be in a particular, serve in a particular role.
Okay, well, I believe that's a very good point, Andrew, but I don't think we're going to. As everybody's signed up, I believe that unless you're all, anybody else has any comments, I believe we're going to, we're being asked to recommend to full council the adoption of a disclosure and barring service checks for councillors policy. Are we all in agreement?
Agreed.
No, agreed. Thank you very much for that. We'll move to item 14, which is the Planning and Licensing Committees. Jonathan, it's you again.
Thank you, Chair, keeping me busy this evening. So each month, Dorset Council receives, and Mike Garrity, Head of Planning, who's here this evening as well, will correct me if I've got this not entirely right. Each month, on average, then we're receiving 350 planning applications to this council. And you have 3 area planning committees, and you have a strategic planning committee that will deal with the most significant of them, but 3 planning committees to determine those applications. And it's simply not possible for every one of those planning applications to go forward and be decided by a committee of councillors, because you'd all be sitting on planning committees, and you'd probably be sitting every day of the month in order to get through the business. And so as a practical response to that, you've delegated certain of those planning applications to be decided by your officers. And this report is about, I suppose you'd describe it as rebalancing, rebalancing the point at which applications are determined, can be determined by a committee rather than by an officer with delegated powers. And we've set out a series of recommendations, first of all in the report, about changes to the officer scheme of delegation to give ward councillors and also your town and parish councils a greater voice in whether an application is suitable to go forward to committee rather than being dealt with by an officer with a delegated power. I'm going to skip over the second recommendation because that's slightly more complex, and I'm going to ask Mike Garrity to help with that one. But recommendations 1, 3, and 4 sit together, And so they're about that rebalancing of where an application is determined. Recommendation 5 is about your licensing committee arrangements. And at the moment, you have a single licensing committee, and there's a recommendation here that alongside the practice in a number of other councils, we form a second licensing committee so that you have a licensing and gambling acts committee and a general licensing committee, and that's for the technical reasons that are outlined in the report. And then alongside that, a recommendation that the chair and vice chair and other members of the licensing and gambling committee are also appointed to the general licensing committee. And it's about administrative convenience and being able to separate the business of licensing more sensibly. And I think if there were members of the licensing committee here this evening, they would say that certainly in the last council, it was an area that was particularly busy for that committee. And so this is an intensely practical recommendation about helping to manage and separate their business more effectively. But Chairman, if I could ask Mike Garrity to comment on the second recommendation, which we're presenting more as an option for you.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Yes, thank you, Chair. Mike Garrity here, Head of Planning. I think the nature of the recommendations here, broadly speaking, are designed there to give a more direct approach to the perception, I suppose, that decisions are made as delegated rather than actually being dealt with by committees when we're getting representations from members and the town and parish councils. So I think the idea of the major applications going automatically to committee seems a sensible one, and I think we've looked at numbers and I think that works well, and it also gives that due scrutiny without any undue process being interrupted by that. I think there is an area of I suppose I'd flag up with members of this committee to be aware of. We have one of the recommendations in this is to deal with applications which are contrary to the development plan. Now that sounds relatively straightforward on the face of it, in that what we would say is that if an application is contrary to the development plan and we're recommending approval, that ought to automatically go to committee, and that currently doesn't exist at the moment. Because at the moment, what would happen is, if it's contrary to the development plan, there may be good reasons why it would be recommended for approval. And it could be, for example, that there are other material considerations that weigh against that. The development plan may actually be quite out of date on a particular issue, and there have been changes in legislation which have led to a difference of view on that point. It could even be that there's been an appeal decision previously that's led us to a position where actually it's a straightforward position that we wouldn't want to automatically take it to committee in those circumstances. What the amendment is showing here in the appendix is that if it was contrary to the development plan, it would automatically go to committee. Now, bear in mind as well that anybody can recommend that something goes to the Secretary of State for determination. So, for example, if we have somebody, a member of public, asking the Secretary of State to determine, they can call that in. So that would actually allow the Secretary of State to call it in. So under those circumstances, we would automatically take that to committee as it currently stands. If we move to a position where it's just if something is contrary to the development plan, and bearing in mind what I've already said on that issue, I think there's a risk here for the planning committees, in the sense that it might increase workloads of those committees, because you could end up with a lot more applications coming to those committees. That could in turn lead to a delay in decision making coming forward, which I think is a risk to us, bearing in mind that local authorities are under a lot of scrutiny now as far as reaching statutory targets for decision making, and that could overload the system. There is also, I think, something I'd like to flag up, the potentially greater scope for ambiguity around the delegated decisions, that when the development plan is taken as a whole, officer interpretation is that they are not contrary to the development plan. I think you could see a situation where there is a challenge to that interpretation. So I think in some ways, whilst on the face of it, it sounds like it's increasing the autonomy of the committees, it could actually lead to greater risks and challenges to those decision-making approaches. And on the final point on that, I would just say that if we're faced with a situation that an application is contrary to the development plan and we're recommending approval for it, the likelihood is, if that's raising a significant concern, the ward members will have already flagged that up with us, as would the town or parish councils, and we would want to tread very carefully with those anyway. So there's a real likelihood that we would be taking those decisions to committee. But I think, to sum all of that up, I think the way that it's phrased without the automatic referral probably is a safer bet for us. So when it comes to that particular recommendation, that if it's contrary to the development plan, it goes to committee, I think as officers we would feel more comfortable with it being left alone on that particular issue, because I think there's still sufficient discretion for us to refer that to committees.
So, Chairman, what we've got in front of you this evening are recommendations 1, 3, 4, 5 and 6 being positively recommended to you. We'd also brought forward something, and perhaps we shouldn't have, the second recommendation that actually as officers we feel a bit agnostic about. And so I think, having heard from Mike, I would be more comfortable if we were to put recommendation 2 to one side, to go away and think about that. But certainly the recommendations relating to the trigger for an application to come forward to committee at the request of a town or parish council or a ward councillor, that's really important. And the change in relation to the licensing committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Believe you, Spencer, you're first.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll have a go at this one. I did have a good read of it before I came out. It's a bit like the curate's egg, really, isn't it? There's some good stuff in here that I'm quite happy with, actually. But there's some things that concern me as well. And we're back to my old hobby horse about good governance, because when I refer to, and I do understand the sentiment of wanting to have more engagement with town and parishes, they want to feel more valued in their comments being considered and all that sort of stuff. Has to be material planning consideration. We all know that. And I pick up the point about some of the ageing aspects of some of our our legacy local plans, that we wait till we get our new local plan. But there's a cost implication in whatever we do here, you know. And I'm pleased to see that we're going to set recommendation 2 aside, because I think that needs to be looked at in a lot more detail. My worry is that if more applications come to committee, the cost is hugely different, around 10 times more expensive to deal with a planning application that gets to committee. It clogs the system up, it slows the process down. We get more grumpy people because they didn't get their application approved when they wanted it to. But if I go over the page on 172, there's an attempt here to explain that it says it's proposed that when the Dorset Council ward member or parish or town council has made a representation contrary to the officer's proposed recommendation, the decision to refer an application to committee would rest with the relevant planning committee chair or vice chair in consultation with the relevant ward member. Well, that's a bit like a rolling dice here going round and round. I'm a little bit concerned, one or the other. You either deal with it and consult, or you consult and deal with it. You can't consult, deal with it, and then get them to have another go at it. That worries me a little bit. And in the same paragraph, it refers to council-owned land applications and so on. I am very concerned. One of the things that we've always held very highly in all councils that I've been involved in is the transparency. When we're dealing with the use or sale of our own assets, we really have to be transparent about that and not allow it to be done at an allegation. So I wouldn't find myself able to support that this evening as it's written. I think it's not good governance. I think we need to do better in that respect. As I said, I do like the suggestion of 2 being set aside. Was there anything else? So, written all sorts of stuff down here. So I said that there's other bits in here that don't reflect on transparency as I think it should do. At 1.4, for example, it's not transparent enough in my view. But certainly suggesting the report hasn't got a financial implication I don't agree with. I think it does. And just for the record, I looked at Appendix A, which I think came out separately, and I couldn't find any track changes on it, so I couldn't read it and understand what it was different. Now, that might be something that we can rectify beyond the meeting, but I can't comment on it because I can't see what the track changes are. So there are bits in here that I'm happy with, Chairman, but there's bits I can't support because I think there is a worry for me around the good governance and the transparency of how we deal with our business of this council.
Okay, thank you. Leader of the council wishes to make a comment, I believe, next.
Yeah, thank you. Nick Ireland, Crossways Ward. On the ward member bit, which I fully support, and I'm partially behind this coming to this committee. For those of us who were around in the shadow authority before Dorset Council came into existence, we were in a meeting at Southwark House, if I remember rightly, and I believe it was Councillor Nigel Bundy who proposed the current scheme of delegation, because there actually seemed to be wasn't one. And I think the intention at the time was that we sort of mirrored what was existing in West Dorset, but we didn't end up with it. So essentially, the West Dorset one was essentially what we're proposing tonight, and what we ended up was, does the chairman of the planning committee agree? And there is essentially no veto. We've heard over the last 5 years from town and parish councils that they don't feel listened to, and that, especially in parish councils, what's the point of planning and what's the point of making a consultation when all you do is ignore us? And I've sat on the West and South Planning Committee for the last 5 years, and it's been a constant complaint. So I think the proposed solution is the right one. And on the item about council-owned property, I've sat on the planning committee for 5 years. There have been an awful lot of applications where essentially officer time, and that's an expense, is essentially 20 minutes of a report which the committee passes immediately because it's so trivial, and it's only in front of the committee because it's council-owned property. In my mind, that's a waste of money, and I appreciate the comment about transparency, but some of them are literally so trivial that there's really no reason that it has to be in front of the committee at all.
Thank you. Andy, you're next.
I'm encouraged by the desire to engage with town and parish councils a lot closer. I do have a concern, having served on parish council and planning committees there may be a sense of obligation to refer anything even mildly controversial upwards. And I worry that our chair and vice chair of planning committees might end up having to triage everything, and a significant increase in workload.
Thank you. Alex, I believe you were next.
Thank you, Chair. In the same vein as Andy's talking about, I'm thinking about my days on planning at Weymouth Town Council, and I'm curious around the sort of expectation of what we're putting on parishes and towns within this format, because unless they're not using a, I guess, prescribed model for each of themselves, it's still going to cause a backlog this end, isn't it? Because we would do it as object or approve, but the language in this document seems to be that we would just like to take it to committee, regardless of if it's approved or objected against within the town council. So yeah, I really do take the point from Andy and sorry, I don't know your surname, Councillor Price, about the rolling dice triage, because it would be that. But I think unless we have a set language of how our parishes and towns communicate with us, there's just going to be a constant battle with them and their process, regardless of what we can do as our process. So I think that needs to be part of this as well.
Okay. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I'm very conscious that the incoming government has been very bold in its ambitions to build a lot more properties, so the numbers quoted of planning applications that we've been received can expect to treble. I'm also mindful, of course, that the leader of council earlier this year said that he would rather use the salary of an executive director to pay for 3 additional planning officers. I suspect he will need to get rid of every executive director to pay for the number of planning officers that we are going to see required in this council. Turning attention to the paper before us, the licensing committee, am I right in thinking that the chair of the licensing committee is in receipt of an SRA? In the event of us creating a second SRA with an additional person chairing that committee, we would effectively, of course, be reintroducing, or if you like, a backdoor introduction of an SRA that was started to be removed as a result of the decision by the leader not to appoint lead members earlier this year. There's such an early reversal in the position. Of course, if the same person were to chair both committees, and if that were to be permitted, then of course they would only be entitled to one SRA, as I understand it, and therefore there'd be no change in circumstance. Have I understood that correctly?
Well, are you asking me? I'm going to ask Jonathan to comment regarding the creation of an additional SRA.
Chairman, thank you. I can be very clear about that. So what we are proposing is that for administrative convenience and for understanding of the different work that's carried out by the licensing committees, the different statutory areas in which the licensing committee operates, we simply split the licensing committee, have one licensing committee dealing with one type of business, one with another type of business, but it is the same set of councillors and the same person in the chair. There would be no additional special responsibility allowance. So a councillor is only allowed one special responsibility allowance anyway, and it would be the same person chairing both committees. We're simply, for convenience, giving them different names to demarcate the different business that they deal with.
Okay, so anybody else like to make a comment? There's been a number of concerns about the paper, but no one's put forward any suggestions. Alternatively, by taking out recommendation 2, we appear to be appeasing a number of the concerns that people have raised. Would anybody like to make a recommendation, or are we moving forward? Would you, Spencer?
Yeah, just try something then, Chairman, just for clarity. I read out that particular passage on page 172, that we strike out the in consultation with relevant ward members, which is the second time it's been said. We cross out the second reference. Got one reference, it gets looked at by the chairs and vice chairs, then it either goes on the agenda or it doesn't. I think that's clarity, and I think if we took those other words out, I would be quite content with that. My only disappointment, I take Councillor Ireland's point about council-owned land and so on and so forth. However, you should never, in my judgment, you should never compromise good governance. Even if it's inconvenient on occasions, you should stick to the principle of good governance, because otherwise it becomes a little bit of a slope where you start, well, that'd be all right, we did that on that one, we can do this on this one. And I think we need to stick quite rigidly to the principles of good governance. It's held us in good stead in the first 5 years as council. I see no reason why we should change that at this point in time. So I won't support that bit of it, but that amendment I've suggested on the wording, I would support. And I do think the report needs to acknowledge there is a cost. There is a cost involved because of the potential for more items to come to committee. Otherwise, well, I'm quite happy to move the recommendation subject to the change I've suggested on the wording. I think the transparency thing I don't support. That should be staying with the status quo on that one.
Right.
Yeah, take it off. Take the second one out. Yeah. Second reference in consultation with relevant ward members.
Okay. So we need to be, let's just be clear what we're actually recommending to council here. So you wish to take out the wording which refers to, so it says refer an application to committee would rest with the relevant planning committee chair and or vice chair in consultation with the relevant ward members, but the ward members already mentioned above. Yes. So are we happy with that? We would strike that part out. Jonathan?
So, Chairman, I think that works, but that would work very well. So if you were to take that as a proposal from Councillor Flower, what you would be doing is removing recommendation 2 altogether, accepting recommendations 1 to 7, but with the deletion of that superfluous reference to in consultation with ward councillors.
Okay, well, I believe that with that, there seems to be consensus that we are happy to recommend. Now, is there anybody who is not happy to recommend to council? Please indicate now. Okay, well, in that case, we will be moving forward with that recommendation with those amendments as agreed. Thank you very much. We'll move to item 15, which is the work programme, which is asking members to note the work programme. Expect any comments? Item 16 is up. One moment. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just one request on the work programme. In a previous meeting where we had a risk management update, we had a discussion about the prioritisation of getting risks managed in a prioritised way, but also the fact that the small number of extreme risks, the mitigation plans and some updates on those were not very easy to understand, let's say. I think I used unintelligible for one of them. And requested that we actually have a deep dive on those extreme risks in the Audit Committee, which was agreed by the Chair. But just as I mentioned earlier about the action tracking, I just want to make sure we don't miss that. So we do schedule that in, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That's noted, and we'll ensure that takes place. Item 16, urgent items. I have no urgent items. So item 17, exempt business, there is no exempt business. So at 8:36, like that, we will bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much for attendance. Thank you.